Bernie Sanders' Tom Perez 8-state Come Together Fight Back tour is an effort to energize and mobilize a political opposition while strengthening the Democratic Party. One of the stops was in Texas, where Bernie Sanders delivered his political revolution call to arms. Politics, Sanders says, is not a movie. It's what happens to our rights, to our lives.
And you can make the choice. You can make the choice of allowing the Koch brothers and the billionaire class to make the decisions, or you and millions of others in this great state and around this country, that we stand up together. We determine the future of this country.
Sanders says most Americans want Congress and the White House to deal with real issues, working-class issues like jobs, retirement security, getting really affordable, good health care. Democrats, he says, have to be strong and active on those issues in all 50 states. Sanders dismisses arguments that Democrats can't win in red states.
I don't believe that, not for a minute. When you got people working longer hours for lower wages, when you got right-wing governors tempting to throw people off of health insurance and give tax breaks to billionaires, don't tell me we cannot win in each and every state in this country.
With Korean War tensions ratcheted up, Professor Christine Hong of the Korea Policy Institute says to understand what's happening, you have to know the Korean War history. She says that in that war, the U.S. threatened the use of atomic bombs against North Korea just a few years after having become the first and so far only nation on Earth to attack civilian populations with nuclear weapons. Professor Hong told WBAI's Building Bridges program,
atomic weapons against civilian populations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it contemplated the use of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. In fact, General MacArthur spoke about his desire to create a cobalt zone, between North Korea and Manchuria, where no life could live for dozens, if not hundreds of years.
Brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield National Labor Office, empowering working Americans with stable health coverage for over 50 years. The National Labor Office is committed to remaining the top choice for the 17 million union workers, retirees, and families they serve. Online at bcbs.com/NLO.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Back from the People's Action Rise Up from Protest to Power convention in Washington, D.C. And what a great event it was. Some 1,500 people from all across the country converging on the nation's capital to talk about the country that they'd like to see, the policies, the issues, the direction that our nation, should be going in their view. And look, you look at what's going on coming out of Washington right now, and lots of chaos. The Trump administration has brought this country even more chaos and more division. And one of the things that I liked about the convention over the past couple of days was the fact that these were folks who were cognizant of the reality that we are divided, that you do need to reach out to those Trump supporters who are going to be left behind and pull them into the fray and say, look, we need a common kind of thought process like we had at other points in our history. And I go back to my grandparents' generation, people led sort of shared lives. Everybody was sort of, kind of near midline because you had a distribution of wealth that created a giant, prosperous working class. Now, that said, I think everybody understands just how difficult it's going to be in this era of Trump because the moneyed interest, they've got control. And they're not going to want to give it up. In fact, they went the convention did a little demonstration out front of the Heritage Foundation, which again, the brain trust of this administration. Look, I think the thing that we've realized, and I think I've always known, and I think most people may have, is that Donald Trump doesn't understand anything about governing, and his knowledge level is about an inch deep, if that. And there was an AP interview on Friday, the transcript release, that you just go, wow. I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with is, wow, how scattershot, how erratic, how neurotic his policies are. And it's not just, tax. It's just not healthcare. It's foreign policy. It's all of it. And when you don't even know how many missiles you've shot off or which country you shot them into, that's a serious problem. And it leads people like me to not have faith in the executive branch of our government. And look, the hope is that at some point, we come back somewhere near the midline of sanity. But when that happens, which direction do we go? Because you go back to Uncle Milty. Milton Friedman said, it's the ideas that are lying around that are gobbled up when a good crisis happens, because you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. And it's those ideas that are percolating in places like the Heritage Foundation that politicians will go, oh yeah, here's something quick, and they will grab onto. That's the scary thing, because, and again, I come back to the left not building the infrastructure, not having the institutions, not having that kind of, bench, if you will. Use a sports analogy, very short bench. The Republicans have really a very deep bench when it comes to bad ideas. And they never seem to run out of bad ideas. And I go back to George W. Bush, who said, our enemies never run out of innovative and creative ways of harming us, and neither do we. Because you look at it and they don't. Every time you turn around, it's more tax cuts for the wealthy. It's more bad trade, regardless of where it is. And I look at just the story that came out yesterday, where the WTO ruled against us. And again, this is where Trump had found that kernel. The blind squirrel found the nut. Are these trade deals, these tribunals, these investor-state dispute settlement setups, all bad? Here in this country, we had some labeling requirements. I want to know if they're dolphin-safe tuna. We want to know if you're using, whatever, what chemical this or that. Want to know where it's produced. I think, my view, information is not bad. Well, according to the WTO, that violates the spirit of NAFTA, which is a least restrictive trade barrier model. So by having labeling requirements in this country, we have harmed the Mexican producers, and therefore they are able to collect damages on us, which the WTO ruled was in the amount of, I think it was $163 million. They can do that every year because that's how much they claim they've been harmed. Now, they were seeking retaliatory sanctions of $500 million. And they're going to, I guess, impose trade sanctions on our high fructose corn syrup. So what Trump has brought us, and again, this is, have the conversation. but it's erratic, and there doesn't seem to be a plan in place. We're going to have this tit for tat back and forth with Mexico, and now we've started it with Canada. Because evidently soft lumber is now the battleground where we're going to start another trade war. And while I'm not totally against the breaking down of neoliberal policies, I want you to have a plan. I want there to be something of a thought process. I don't want to see the same bad movie over and over. And speaking of bad movies, Donald Trump says he wants to slash the corporate tax rates. The big tax plan coming out, he wants to gut taxes from 35% on corporations that none of them really pay now, to be honest, because there's so many loopholes. He wants to drop that down to 15% that no one will really pay. And they claim this is going to free up money for job creation. Now, we've heard this before. We've seen this movie. We've seen the sequel. We've seen the sequel to the sequel and the sequel to the sequel to the sequel. We've seen this. But this administration and the Republicans still claiming if we do it enough, it's got to work at some point, right? If we give the wealthy enough, if we give these corporations enough, eventually something's got to fall out of their pockets that we can scurry over. Eventually, right? Now, according to the administration, they say that these tax cuts, they may be the biggest tax cuts we've ever had. And now you go back to the Reagan years where we cut the top marginal tax rate in this country from 70% all the way down to 28%. Again, I hope it's not that bad because we then created massive debts. Now, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, he claims that these handouts to the wealthy and corporations, they're going to pay for themselves. And again, you've heard it. We're going to raise economic growth. We're going to make the pie bigger. We're going to grow the pie. What history has shown us, though, and I think, again, if you understand where we've been, you'll know where we're going. The tax cuts might increase growth a little bit around the edges, might do a little bit. But the reality is it's going to explode the deficit. We know this. And it's going to drive up interest rates sky high. And it's going to cost us even more in the long run. We know this. But it's going to enrich the wealthy and the corporations. And that's the goal. The hell with the rest of us. I mean, it's a bad idea. I understand. I'm telling you right now, what they're touting, a bad idea. And the thing is the federal government is going to understand. They're going to have to borrow more money to fill the gaps of what we've already spent and what we've already allocated. And eventually, we're going to have to borrow more and more if we're going to do the military-industrial complex stuff and a lot more. The other side of this is that once you do what they're going to do, we're going to lower rates and you're going to have all this investment come in and you're going to see investors come. You're going to. They're going to pour money into treasury bonds. It's going to happen. It's going to make the value of the dollar go up. And in turn, it's going to make our exports a lot more expensive. And yes, increase our massive trade deficit because it's going to cost us jobs. Because it's going to make the dollar more expensive, which means exports will be more expensive, which means imports will be much cheaper, and will do the exact opposite of what the Trump supporters claim they want him to do. And I can only think, hello, it's the 1980s calling, and they want us not to make the same dumb mistakes the Reagan administration and Congress did back then when they ballooned the federal deficit with massive tax cuts and enormous military spending. I mean, come on. Just saying. But this is where they're taking us. This is the direction of the scattershot, neurotic administration that some, and again, this blows my mind, that some are still behind. Even after that Friday AP interview. You got to wonder. Honestly, you got to wonder. And how many times do we have to see this same bad movie over and over again? How many times do we have to pay homage to the chair, if you will, in the hopes that maybe something trickles down on us? Tell you, tired of being trickled on, and it's not honey. It's not rivers of gold. It is what it is. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about just how crazy this administration is and, what we can do, hopefully, to, well, protect ourselves from the insanity in chief. Quick break, right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
All of my life I have searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1975. That was the day the AFL-CIO held a Jobs Now rally in Washington, D.C. A painful recession had pushed unemployment in the U.S. to 9%. Many workers across the nation thought the Ford administration was not doing enough to address the needs of working families. 60,000 people, many of them union members carrying banners representing their unions, gathered in RFK Stadium. There they heard speeches, including one from Senator Hubert H. Humphrey, who had served as vice president under Lyndon B. Johnson. His speech described the devastating impact of unemployment. Senator Humphrey said, "Our nation must recommit itself to the goal and the promise of full employment, a job for every American who is willing and able to work. Perhaps we would get bolder action and more compassion from this administration if some of its top advisors had a little taste of unemployment themselves. Perhaps they would know what unemployment is. It's drawing your last unemployment check with no job in sight. It's sitting in the dark to save on the light bill. It's making shoes last another month and driving on bald tires. It's eating a little less so the kids can eat a little more. It's facing eviction because you can't pay the rent or meet the mortgage. It's borrowing from your brother-in-law or letting your insurance lapse. It's facing yourself in the mirror and asking why and how much longer. It's wondering how a nation this rich, this enterprising, this great can let more than 8 million Americans who want to work and need to work go without work." Some protesters rushed the stage at the rally, causing it to end early. But his questions still remain. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Just when you thought it was safe, those crazy Republicans are at it again. It's time for the Rick Smith Show's Conservative Alert.
Gotta be honest, I'm still kind of... I saw this ABC Washington Post poll that just grabbed me and said, there's some serious problems in this country when 98% of Trump supporters say that they do not regret their decision. I mean, look at all of the insanity, all of the chaos, all of the scandal at this point already. And 98% of them said, nope, didn't make a mistake. In fact, doubling down on the insane guy. It just leaves you scratching your head. Here to help us work through some of this with our weekly dose of sanity, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So 98% of Trump supporters, according to ABC Washington Post poll, they don't regret it, not a bit.
I'm actually surprised it's not 100%.
Okay, and why is that? Why do you think that is?
A couple of weeks ago, you asked me, is this a shared psychosis of sorts? And I think at the time you felt maybe a little, preposterous saying it, but I think this result is confirmation. It's the answer to your question. And when you look at this man, Donald Trump, this is him, right? I mean, he doesn't admit mistakes. He does not apologize when he's wrong. He doesn't even, there is no concept of him being wrong in his mind.
Right.
And so this is what he does, right? He doubles down. It doesn't matter how many fact checkers line up to say, hey, this is a falsehood that you just, are repeatedly putting out to the American public. He doesn't care. I mean, he doubles down even more and says, this is just an attack. This is a conspiracy against me. And in that way, he is very much a reflection of the people who voted for him and who still support him very fervently. And no matter how incoherent he becomes, no matter how erratic he becomes, they have to continue to support him, because if they don't, then it looks like everybody made a mistake. And these are just not people who want to admit making a mistake, especially not as one as large as putting someone who is just unfit for the job there.
Yeah, I mean, I read the interview transcript that the AP did last week. And as I'm reading through it, I'm going, I don't know how anyone can read this, and it's his own words, and it's all over the map. And immediately, I got about halfway through, and I was thinking about Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy had done a skit about James Brown. James Brown would go on this rant, and he'd go, James means that stuff. I don't know what he said, but he means it. And I couldn't help. That was what I was witnessing.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't make it. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I've only been able to read about half of it as it's written, because it's anxiety provoking in a lot of ways, because you're trying to read it for content and context, and neither are there to be found. And, he doesn't seem to understand that in some ways he's not even answering the questions that are being asked of him.
Nope, not even close.
And the interviewer, sort of is kind of just, I think, struck by how poorly he's comporting himself in the interview, and at the same time is unable to really follow through with it, because it kind of made me think about the psychiatric interview and times that I'm sort of interviewing patients who are not stable. And at a certain point, after I've asked a certain amount of questions and gotten these very tangential, in some ways nonsensical answers, then I sort of know, okay, this person is what we call in the medical field, this person is now what we call a poor historian. And I can't necessarily, bank on the testimony that they're giving me that it's completely accurate, because their insight and judgment is poor. Their memory is very poor. Their attention span is microscopic. Right, exactly.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is that really a clinical term? Poor historian? I mean, just neurotic and insane seems to be enough. I mean, there's enough of those clinical terms. And bad historian, is that an actual diagnosis?
So in the medical field, and it's not just psychiatrists who use this terminology. Many physicians in all specialties use the terminology poor historian, and essentially what they're saying is that that patient is unable to give a reliable medical history.
Okay.
And that's where the term historian, that connection is made, because we're looking at the person as someone who can inform us about their medical history. And in psychiatry, you're wanting someone to inform you not just about their medical history, but also their psychiatric history. And so when somebody's unable to just even give you factual information about themselves, and if you kind of go back to that interview, there were a couple of times where the interviewer had to say, no, actually, you did say this. And so in that instance, Donald Trump is a very poor historian about his own, even, the record of what he said in the past, or his record of tweets that's obviously there for everyone to see. And when you think about even the example of his inauguration, how he continues to persist on this belief that he had the biggest crowd there was, again, that makes him a poor historian, right? Because if we were sort of sentient on that day and we saw the crowds, and we can, we have an institutional memory. We remember what the crowd looked like in 2008. And just even comparing those two inaugurations, we know that what he's saying is patently false.
Right. I've got the pictures. So, in fact, I send them on occasionally just to remind folks that you're right.
Right. But this is but this is someone who is so obstinate and intransigent. He is not going to back down, even in the face of irrefutable facts. In his mind, he can always refute whatever doesn't go along with, the delusions that he has in his mind.
Right, but in his defense, Jan, he does say a lot of things. It's hard to remember all that stuff.
it's hard to remember all that stuff. And like he said the other day, they asked him about an executive order, and he just flat out, I guess again confirmed what we had been thinking. He said, "Hey, I can't read all of that. I didn't read the whole thing. I just signed it." I mean, it's like, hey, what do you think I'm here for, guys? I mean, I'm just a rubber stamp. But, he's telling on himself again.
Now, that's a huge difference between, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. And look, I was not a Bill Clinton fan at all. But the one thing that you could say is at least what he put his name on, he actually read. I mean, the guy was I couldn't have read all of it, but, that's what he did.
Absolutely. And even just sort of, policy aside, when you think about, kind of the American, folklore of presidents, it's all about like these very eloquent figures that are, delivering this like very patriotic and like effervescent language, and it's inspiring to people. And again, like I can't stand Ronald Reagan, right? But at the same time, I know that Ronald Reagan delivered,
he could hit a punchline.
Very good. Yeah, he delivered very good performances. And even despite, whatever his record proves to be on the paper, he's known as someone who is a great orator. And in that sense, Donald Trump doesn't have much in common with both Democrat or Republican presidents who have at least made it a point to have a body of work of what they have put out to the public, either in speeches or in their interviews. I mean, some of these interviews obviously have broke very important international news or domestic news. And when you think about what Trump is delivering in these interviews, in his addresses to the public, it just is so pathological. And it's like the more that he speaks, the more revelations I think we get about, his psyche and how pathological he really is, unfortunately.
But here's the thing. Couldn't you say that, Ronald Reagan was a trained actor, so delivering a punchline was right in his wheelhouse? Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, so, getting into the policy stuff was kind of in his wheelhouse. Barack Obama was really a great orator, community organizer, so was used to dealing with people. Donald Trump, kind of a used car salesman. And what we're seeing is the use of, a lot of hyperbolic language, a lot of, amazing and tremendous, and like an infomercial guy. So
exactly,
that's what we got. It's what we got.
Exactly. And again, while they're kind of the same conversation that you and I had about the Archie Bunker syndrome, and the difference between members of the audience that recognize it as satire and members of the audience who 100% agree with what's being said and aren't getting the joke. Infomercials are similar in that way, right? Because there's many of us that watch infomercials and go, okay, there's no way I believe that these knives are the best knives that have ever been invented, right? Exactly. I mean, some of us are very skeptical and cynical, and so we're not going to send our $39.99 plus shipping and handling to that infomercial. But then there's another half of that audience, right, that believes, oh, yeah, they're saying it on television, so how can they say something on television that isn't, blatantly false, right? And so there's a belief that happens there, and it's the art of the deal, right? A sale is being made, and a used car salesman, I mean, obviously there's all these analogies there, and again, it just deals with persuasion and powers of persuasion, and there are a lot of people who hear all of that self-aggrandizement and actually believe it, and trust him more and believe that he is competent and that he is powerful and that he is going to bring all of this economic prosperity because they believe, again, the grandiose delusions that he's putting out there. They don't see it as delusional.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that bothers me is, I had hoped as a country we had a collective, somewhere near the sane line, somewhere near where you see something that you go, wow, I don't want that guy planning a trip to the zoo, let alone being in charge of the most powerful military in the history of civilization, because you look at how neurotic and all over the map. And I know there are some who are saying, the unpredictability is a good thing. I don't know that I buy that.
Yeah. And again, as I always say, at the micro level, these are individuals who, in their own lives, deal with conflict this way and also make decisions in terms of their, personal budgets, in terms of the way that they, we do this analogy every election where they talk about the government's budget the same way that families are at the table balancing their checkbook. And so in terms of priorities, in terms of what these people want, it is internally consistent with what he's saying. I was actually at the mall this weekend with my kids, and I was sitting there, we were eating some ice cream, and this guy walked by, and he looked to be, maybe his late 20s, early 30s, white guy, blonde hair, blue eyes. And his shirt was the first thing I saw when I looked up. It said, "Build the wall." And on the back of it, it said, Trump Pence, and this is obviously an election shirt that he's proudly walking around wearing. And so again, when you think about like the conversation that's going on in Congress and this back and forth in terms of policy and who's going to pay for it and how is it going to get into this bill, the people on the ground who actually just voted for this, they're not thinking about like that sausage making process. They're thinking about build the wall because I don't want those people over here. And they're hearing, what we are always calling a dog whistle. They're hearing that piece of the conversation. And so, when you fast forward to, his first 100 days and people are actually questioning his ability to forward his agenda because of all of this antipathy that's happening in the GOP Congress, even around just funding his border wall. Again, they're not focused really on the planks of the policy and how it actually gets funded. It really is an isolationist sentiment and a very xenophobic sentiment that they identified with. Right. And so they don't necessarily see him as wrong or failing in terms of achieving that goal.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and again, you come back to the idea that he has policy, he has an agenda. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm missing it. Because he's all over the map. I mean, one of the things that he and I gave him credit for, our trade deals, we need to do something about China. Our trade deficits are just mind-blowing and out of this world. And yet you see him, this week saying that he's willing to cut a deal favorable with China if they'll do something with North Korea. And immediately I'm thinking, wow, he's completely shifted on the issue and has bought into the American carrot and carrot scheme of foreign policy of, hey, make our problems go away and here's our economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also think that, again, one of the things that stood out about this interview and just what has come out over the last couple of weeks when he's had these state visits is that a lot of the statements that he made during the campaign, again, they resonated with voters because he was making very low information, not based on facts, statements, right? He was just kind of wildly throwing out, okay, China's a currency manipulator. And that really rallies the crowd because they want to hear this, sort of insult of this other world power that is oftentimes seen as being in competition with America. And so they don't necessarily read beneath, okay, well, what does that actually mean in terms of, the economy? And then fast forward to now he's president and no longer candidate. And they asked him after he met with the president of China, they asked, like, okay, all those other, months ago you kept saying they were a currency manipulator. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, no, I actually just met with him. And no, he's not a currency manipulator. And they said, well, wait a minute, how did it just change like that? And then, the best thing he could come up with was, oh, well, they used to be a currency manipulator, but now that I'm president, they're not.
His mere presence changed all that.
Exactly, right? And so, again, it's very grandiose. There's a belief system that he has, and much of that AP interview, the first couple of paragraphs about it, they were asking him that, like, how have you, been able to get certain things done? And he talked about, these missiles and how he got this negotiated price. And they're sort of asking, okay, well, how does that work when you multiply it out to all of these orders that have to be filled? And he's just going, no, it's just the fact that I'm in the room that they're going to make a deal.
That's it.
Mexico's going to pay for the wall because I said so, right? And so he's very unilaterally, changing all of these things. And it's just delusional to believe that as one individual you can do all of this stuff, right?
It's crazy. But here's the thing. I got a bunch of email from folks who looked at the AP interview, and then President Obama finally came back from vacation. Which I got to be honest, I'm jealous. Angry, all of that stuff. He looked like he was having way too much fun while the rest of our suffering. But, him and his complete sentences and his complete thoughts and actual thoughtful language made me pine for, 4 months ago.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it is such a discrepancy and disparity, and you really get a sense of how much we really have lost in terms of just the honor and the respect of holding that office. Now, I mean, so much of his presidential communication is on Twitter. And hey, I'm on Twitter. I love Twitter, clearly. I wouldn't even be on your show right now if it weren't for, the commentary that I make on Twitter. But that's not what I expect from my president. I mean, at some point, I expect for my president to be, quote unquote, Reagan-esque, right? And to have some understanding of that there is a show you need to be putting on to look competent and to look like, we should be listening to you and you have credibility. And unfortunately, he's just not doing that. And again, the people who are still supporting him, they were okay with that then, and they're always going to be okay. It's just like he said, if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, they would still support him, and they really would. I don't think he was wrong about that.
No, look, and that 98% of people who voted for him in this last ABC Walpole poll, just solidifies that. 98% have seen all of this information come out about Russia, the Nunes thing, the Chavez thing, all of this stuff, and still our guy.
Right. And then, it's so ironic, right, because, their whole chant during the campaign was lock her up. And they wanted to lock her up over, an email server. And presumably because of an email server. I mean, I'm sure they had other reasons that mostly involved misogyny and some other things. But now, when you juxtapose that with who Trump has been for, these last 100 days, if we've gotten to that point yet, it's everything they projected onto Hillary Clinton, but just multiplied by a million. But they have no problem with it. And again, it really stems from that identification with him as an individual and as a person. And like we talked about a few weeks ago, the Stockholm Syndrome phenomenon, that the more strongly that individual identifies with him, the less likely they are to see him as fallible or to see him as he's not telling them the truth. They have decided that he is their savior, and they're not going to back down on that.
And that's the scary language. You hit the savior language scares me. I've never seen any politician as a savior. They're, in my view, merely a tool to an end. But you've got people who the Trump supporters. They've elevated him to that position, and I worry that you never get them. That they never see the light. They never. I just don't. I fear they never see.
Right, and I think that the other piece of this that we probably don't spend enough talking about, the savior aspect is if you look at the Republican base and who voted for Trump, there's an interesting paradox happening with the evangelical crowd, right? Yep. Where we've talked about the hypocrisy of sort of putting yourself forward as a follower of Christ and, help the poor, help the sick. But then you're, on the flip side, supporting this political ideology that is rooted in austerity and taking things from people and vilifying people for needing help. And it's completely antithetical. But at the same time, they are sort of replacing that evangelical Jesus figure who is very altruistic and replacing him with this like vulture capitalist, very partisan Republican figure who is in some ways preaching like prosperity gospel.
Yep. I was just going to say that. It's the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Because Jesus wants you to be rich. He wants you to take food out of the mouths of children, or at least those seniors, so they don't get those crummy meals on wheels anymore.
Exactly. And so I think that is what is so hypocritical about it, and what makes the rest of us kind of go, wait a minute, this just doesn't make any sense. Like, how bad is this cognitive dissonance? But in many ways, the way that Trump has elevated himself to this like godlike figure who's omnipresent and omnipowerful, that is also unfortunately how his voters have elevated him as well. And it is why they continue to see him as a savior figure, even though he's quite abusive and deleterious to their interests.
Yeah, well, it is that mindset of the hyper religious. And, you know, I've always said, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, but those who have the extreme religious views, I mean, you look at the Quiverful people, there's a bunch of these far right religious movements, the people who want to bring us Christian Sharia law. I think that's a mental illness, to be honest with you.
Well, and they do too, except when when they look at the Taliban overseas, right, they see it as a mental illness, and they see it as ISIS, and they need to go and they need to be fighting the next crusade, right? And they can vilify Sharia law, and they can be very afraid of it happening and coming to America. But at the same time, they are wanting to institute a theocracy of, white male Christianhood, however you want to call it, that again, is not necessarily consistent with their stated values. And it's the American Taliban, but they don't have the insight to see that they're doing the exact same things that they vilify so much.
It's just nuts. Last question I've got for you, is there hope? I mean, I look at, and I'll be honest with you, I read that transcript and I just kind of sat back and go, man, if this doesn't bring people around, I don't know what is. Give us that moment of hope. Is there one?
Okay, moment of hope. 2008, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, still had about 22 to 25% approval. Okay, these are diehard people that if you polled them at, from the beginning of George Bush's presidency all the way to the end after all the disasters happened, they still supported him 100%. They still loved everything about him.
True believers.
But we were able to elect Barack Obama, who, again, was the antithesis of that government and that administration. So I think we just need to not get bogged down in, this is, again, like you said last week, 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton, right? And so, yes, these people are fervently still supporting him, but at the end of the day, they're still in the minority.
Well, there is a moment of hope there. I mean, hopefully the sane will come out and not be overwhelmed and not be distraught and not be turned away. And, well, the next election is hopefully, just a little over a year and a half away. If we can just hold on.
Yeah, we're coming.
Jane,
the resistance is coming.
There you go. I appreciate the time. Great talking with you.
You too. Have a good week.
You as well. Thanks so much. Our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
That guy wants me to give my money to someone like you. But I do believe in what a crazy man can do.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1944. That was the day the Army National Guard seized the Chicago property of Montgomery Ward and removed its chairman, Sewell Avery. The Chicago-based company repeatedly refused to accept a National War Labor Board order to recognize the workers' union and abide by the board-negotiated collective bargaining agreements. After refusing the second board order, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the Army National Guard to seize the company's central mail order house, retail store, and other related properties in the city. Avery was physically carried out of his office. Wartime no-strike pledges were in effect to avoid strikes or any disruption in war production. From a distance, it looked as if the president had triumphed the cause of labor in forcefully implementing the Wagner Act. Workers of the CIO United Mail Order Warehouse and Retail Employees Union had walked off the job over recognition issues on April 12th. Montgomery Ward officials argued again, as they had 2 years earlier, that they were not engaged in war production, held no government contracts, and that the dispute is not one which might impede the prosecution of the war by the board's own terms. But the government feared strike activity would only spread to other industries in Chicago and elsewhere. Local Teamsters and railway brotherhoods all supported the strike and refused to handle shipments to and from Ward facilities. The CIO union agreed to end the strike on the eve of the seizure. Others in the labor movement called FDR's move a hoax and a device to break strikes and get workers back on the job without any gains. Roosevelt issued a third seizure of Ward's facilities nationwide by the end of the year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
To the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it appears that there may be possibly, who knows, a replace plan. It looks like the Freedom Caucus and the Tuesday group and the Monday afternoon, coffee gaggle, they've come around to see just how bad of a bill they can come up with while simultaneously exempting themselves. And it's being reported by Sarah Cliff that indeed the Republicans are, for the rest of us, higher premiums, no mandated, ending pre-existing conditions, none of that mandatory stuff, the minimum stuff, none of that stuff, except for them. According to reports, a spokesperson for Representative Tom MacArthur, Republican from New Jersey, evidently authored the amendment confirming that indeed his staff and the members of Congress will still be protected by the old law as they push the replacement. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on around the world, I've got Bob Ney, Talk Media News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick. I was listening with interest because I used to fund the House offices, and I know the tricks of the trade when it comes to how you take care of yourself and your staff without looking like you take care of yourself and your staff.
Right. And look, at the end of it, I look at this replacement plan. I don't see anything good coming out of the Republicans' replacement plan. I'm curious your thoughts. Anything good?
Well, no, it's going to be in disarray. Look, the one thing that's going to happen is Trump is going to become hyper-aggressive with the tax plan that he has, hyper-aggressive, because Trump came out and he did do one thing that angered the Freedom Caucus. He said repeal, replace. They wanted, as we know, repeal, right? And then, of course, the Trump plan, for the right or the wrong of it, or however we want to rate it, went nowhere in the House. So the House sat there with nothing. And that then maybe made some decent talk about Democratic and Republican sides getting together in the middle to improve, tweak the original ACA, American Health Care, Act. Now they're bringing forth something, the Freedom Caucus and the Monday Coffee Clutch, or as you said, whatever group it is, because they don't have anything. And they had 7 years of saying they were going to do something and they're not. So they're going to throw all these things out there. I don't see where, anything is going to gel with what the Freedom Caucus brings, because the moderates aren't going to go with it anyway.
Right. No, it's going to be an interesting, watching the Republicans fight amongst themselves, because you've got, the one group saying in the middle saying, we still have to do some good governance stuff because I'm in districts that, I could lose. Right. And then you've got the crazy people who are gerrymandered into absolute security going, no, pain, suffering, pay or die, pay or die, pay or die. It just seems it's going to be interesting to watch.
Well, yes, and if the Democratic side is smart about this, if they are, they will.
If being the key word.
Yeah, you're my if, because I think if they hired you and I to sit down in a room with them, we could come up with something. All right, or if they wanted to do it for free advice. because it's going to be a common sense thing. They can pick and choose, cherry pick the Democratic side of when they want to intervene and to create law, seizing an opportunity of the dissension amongst groups in the Republican side. They can cherry pick.
Yep.
The Democratic side can. Now, if they just want to, say Donald Trump and the Orange Monster and on and on and on, they can do that too. But if they want to seize some people who could vote in either direction, and let's face it, for the good of public policy, if they want to seize some things, Rick, this is going to be ample opportunity because this thing is just going to get more dissolved on the Republican side and more, pulled apart and triangulated. The whole thing.
And my fear is that they've done enough already to make the Affordable Care Act collapse already because they've defunded parts of it. There's all of this uncertainty. The insurance industry, they're trying to figure out where they're going to go. But by doing nothing, I think they've already created enough of an environment that it collapses on its own. So they in essence, get their repeal. Well,
into my shock, because I have not been a fan. I'm a fan of doing something, but I have not been a fan of some of the outcomes of the Affordable Care Act. Pharmaceutical companies were given a pass day one, shame on everybody, etc. But having said that, though, the act in the last year has come out better than I thought it would, okay? It really has. But uncertainty will make it a problem in the marketplace. I mean, I don't like a bill that's private sector insurance companies, you give them a ceiling, they're going to go all the way to it.
Absolutely.
I don't like that kind of thing. But the bill did do better in the last year than a lot of people thought. But if it's an uncertainty factor and pieces are undone or not undone and the tweaks aren't made, yes, it will in fact eventually get into a position where somebody says, "Oh, what are we going to do? It's collapsed."
No, I mean I've already said that they've done enough already, and part of me thinks that's the plan. That they're going to do this dog and pony show, so that they can maintain we tried, but it's still the Democrats' fault. I did want to get your thoughts as a former member of Congress, as someone who's been around when the government is shut down, and all of that stuff. Are we going to see that by the end of the week? I mean, because you got Trump who's dug in, says no border wall money, no going forward.
Now here's my best guesstimate, which I think is going to be correct. If there is a shutdown, it is going to be so brief and so temporary and so innocuous. Speaker Ryan is going to have to do some deals with Minority Leader Pelosi, who used to be the Speaker at one time, and they're going to have to do something because Speaker Ryan doesn't have enough votes to keep the government open. If the government shuts down, it's going to be a complete chaotic nightmare. Doesn't mean the Senate's going to go along with it as much as they've harped. Trump privately does not want this government shut down under any circumstances, okay? He doesn't. I think he's going to yield on the border. I think he's going to yield on it one way or the other right now at this point in time of his life because he doesn't want to shut down. That's what I think is going to happen.
Okay, I mean, because I'm looking at him going, I don't know that he's tied to anything. I actually don't know what the guy thinks.
Well, look, trying to figure out Donald Trump and who's on first base and who does what and who thinks what is becoming extremely difficult. I mean, I thought I had certain things figured out. It's erratic and it's sporadic, and one day he's one thing and one day he's another. Now, in one hand, honestly, it makes it interesting where he will get certain benefits here and there or certain deals because people say, wow, we don't know what on earth he's going to do next. We better grab what we can grab while we can grab it. So on one hand. On the other hand, it's tough to make a deal with him because you don't know where he's going to end up after the deal's made.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's the scary thing.
Politics, if you cut a deal, that might look ugly, but at least hold to your deal, right?
Exactly. I mean, did you read that AP interview on Friday? I mean, or were you able to get through it? No. I guess should be the first bit of it.
No, I wasn't.
The transcript of his interview with the AP reporter, there wasn't a coherent thought almost through the entire thing.
I'll have to read it. I just haven't had the time. But,
I mean, at one point he's saying we shot off 59 missiles. No, wait, it was 79 missiles, and it was wow.
Well, it's different, I must say, and it's continued to be different. And I argue, and I've told friends of mine up and down, however, and I say this big however, it's enough of what people see, and frankly, I thought when I saw 53% of the American people aren't supporting his first 100 days, honestly, Rick, I didn't think that was bad.
No, that's not bad.
I thought it was going to be higher.
But here's the thing: you still have 98% of Trump supporters, according to
absolutely,
who say nope, we don't regret it. He's our guy.
Absolutely, they have held firmer than other people would dream they have, because you have conservatives there who think he is nothing but a New York Republican, which is a Midwest Democrat. All right,
okay.
That's what it is in their eyes.
True.
You have that group. Then you have the group of the middle class and the quote union Democratic people who went with Trump and went against Hillary. And I thought some of them would be like, "Ooh, well, he didn't take China on yet hard enough," but they haven't lost that group yet. So I was actually surprised at the entire thing. But again, on the matter of substance and politics and public policy, the Democratic side must come to some ideas of where they want to be and how they want to be there.
Yeah. No, again, it comes back to what I've always said. The Democrats need to find out who they are.
Sure.
Maybe they should go to the mall and find themselves. There's always that little red dot says you are here. Help them find themselves.
That's true.
And finally, I understand today there's going to be a big meeting at the White House. They've invited all 100 senators. Is that right?
Right. This one made me shiver. Seriously, when I read this morning, I remember when we went to the floor of the House and Senate, I had all our colleagues, some of the famous, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, I can keep going down the list, John McCain. And we saw the, quote, evidence on weapons of mass destruction. And I just had that memory, grilled into my mind when I heard this morning. But I think it's more, I don't think it's a photo op like some of my friends tell me. I think it's a situation where Trump is going to show them secret stuff and known stuff, and they're going to be all in the room and get some feedback where they want to be. Probably this isn't rare, but this is unusual. He's bringing them there for a reason,
Yeah. So are we?
Escalation, I think.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Are we going to be escalating this with North Korea, and what does that mean with China? Because again, I saw this story that Trump said, I'd be willing to cut a deal with China on trade if they did something on North Korea. Which again, back to those Union Democrats who voted for him, that's kind of a stab in their back.
Yeah, I didn't like that conversation at all by Trump. He doesn't need to negotiate away workers' rights on trade because of this lunatic in North Korea. What he needs to do is pressure China to the nth degree. Don't give them something, but pressure them that we're going to do, more wall building with China, more pressure with China. And also, one strategy is that if China does think we're actually going to do something militarily, they don't want that in their backyard, so maybe that'll pressure them a little bit. But I did not like the trade talk.
No, not at all. But here's the thing. I just saw a story
horrible.
this morning that said that the Chinese have launched their first all China-made aircraft carrier. So, you start seeing all of this ramping up and all of this tension and all of this stuff. And,
right.
Are we starting the next Cold War, but only this time with China instead of Russia, or China and Russia?
And Russia, right. I don't know. Trump's policy on that has been all over the place, too. He wasn't supposed to be an interventionist, and that's changed a bit. So, but I think they're going over there because there is an escalation, and there's, something up.
Yeah, I mean, this is the reason, again, during the election, I was saying, I don't know that I want someone who has no idea of what's going on internationally to be in charge of the military. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be, I don't take it lightly that it's all saber-rattling at this point in time. I think this thing could escalate to a point we don't want to be at. And I understand the guy's crazy, and I understand something has to eventually happen. But also, you've got other players over there, including China, in this, and so.
Yeah, again, but I come back to which guy are we talking about being crazy? So there you go.
Well, I was talking about North Korea.
Bob, great talking with you, man.
Erratic on the other one.
I hear you. Great talking with you, man. Appreciate the time.
You too. Thank you, Rick.
Always good talking to our friend Bob Nang. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Texas, are you ready for a political revolution?
The Bernie Sanders, Tom Perez 8-state Come Together Fight Back tour is an effort to energize and mobilize a political opposition while strengthening the Democratic Party. One of the stops was in Texas, where Bernie Sanders delivered his political revolution call to arms. Politics, Sanders says, is not a movie. It's what happens to our rights, to our lives.
And you can make the choice. You can make the choice of allowing the Koch brothers and the billionaire class to make the decisions, or you and millions of others in this great state and around this country, that we stand up together. We determine the future of this country.
Sanders says most Americans want Congress and the White House to deal with real issues, working-class issues like jobs, retirement security, getting really affordable, good health care. Democrats, he says, have to be strong and active on those issues in all 50 states. Sanders dismisses arguments that Democrats can't win in red states.
I don't believe that. Not for a minute. When you got people working longer hours for lower wages, when you got right-wing governors tempting to throw people off of health insurance and give tax breaks to billionaires, don't tell me we cannot win in each and every state in this country.
With Korean War tensions ratcheted up, Professor Christine Hong of the Korea Policy Institute says to understand what's happening, you have to know the Korean War history. She says that in that war, the U.S. threatened the use of atomic bombs against North Korea just a few years after having become the first and so far only nation on Earth to attack civilian populations with nuclear weapons. Professor Hong told WBAI's Building Bridges program,
atomic weapons against civilian populations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it contemplated the use of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. In fact, General MacArthur spoke about his desire to create a cobalt zone, between North Korea and Manchuria, where no life could live for dozens, if not hundreds of years.
Brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield National Labor Office, empowering working Americans with stable health coverage for over 50 years. The National Labor Office is committed to remaining the top choice for the 17 million union workers, retirees, and families they serve. Online at bcbs.com/NLO.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Evidently, Pope Francis gave a surprise TED Talk where he called for a revolution of tenderness. We need to, we all need to be decent to each other, I guess. When there is an us, there begins a revolution. And again, something I've been saying for a very long time, we need to figure out how we lose the team sport mentality, come back to somewhere near sanity. And again, you get all of this stuff comes back to local. And over the last couple of days, we were in Washington for the People's Action Rise Up convention, and the talk was all about how do you take that local? How do you take what's going on in your backyard and make that better, and also move it on to the state level and on to the national level, so that we do just that, which is why I've asked my good friend Matt Parthasarthi to come talk with us, a recently elected official in his hometown of Madison, Connecticut, and congrats to him. Matt, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy to be back on the show, my friend.
So congratulations on the big win. Now that you are in the at the table, what are we doing?
Well, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, the last time you and I talked, we talked about this very thing, and particularly we talked about the state of Connecticut. There's, some surprise, I guess, is probably the best word. It is a reliably blue state, and I remember we talked specifically about some issues at the Hartford State House that were being pushed by Republicans. The Democrats have a majority in both houses of the legislature, and there were some bills that were being pushed by the Republicans at the State House that caught a lot of people by surprise. And your remark was, as I remember, who would have thought that this kind of stuff would go on in Connecticut? And we're talking about things against immigration, things against school funding, things against minority rights in schools, and things like that. And while that's at the state level, there are things that now that I'm at the table, I'm finding there are things at the local level as well that people don't realize because the transparency is not there, because the news isn't really reported as much at the local level. And yet you'd be surprised how many things occur at the local level without our knowledge.
But here's the thing, Matt. I've said for years, the national elections, they don't affect your day-to-day life. It's what happens at your school board. It's what happens at your county commissioners. It's what happens at those local offices where your neighbors are serving on those committees or on those boards or in those offices. That's what really affects your everyday day-to-day life, and that's where the passion and the energy should really be.
It should absolutely be there, right? So a friend of mine and I were talking about this, and his comment to me was, I pay my taxes, I pay my property taxes, I get the pothole in front of my house fixed. Why should I really care about, quote, politics in town? And my response to him was, everything is local. All politics is local. And I'll give you 3 examples. You talk about climate change. Everybody talks about climate change being a national issue. Climate change isn't a national issue. It's a local issue, right? Because the buildings in your town, the office buildings, the retail buildings, the shops, if you have a power plant in town or the next town over, those things pollute. And they may be using inefficient lighting or inefficient production facilities. Those things pollute. We in Connecticut are, we're on the Long Island Sound. And the policies that we have with regard to sewer and septic discharge, effluent discharge, affect Long Island Sound cleanliness, right? So these are all factors that go into climate change. Another issue is taxes. I mean, my friend that talked about his taxes, and all he cares about is property taxes. In our town, over the last 6 years, our property taxes have increased on average over the last 6 years by 8%. And nobody says boo about it. Can you imagine if your income tax or your sales tax went up 8% year over year? People would revolt.
Yeah. Why
aren't they caring as much that the property taxes are going that high? And the third one, and you just mentioned it, which was the schools. What's going on in the schools? And we have an issue right now in the Madison School District where things are happening that people in town are not necessarily aware with, and there is a big concern that even though we're supposed to be apolitical in town, we generally pride ourselves on being not a very political town. These things on the school board have a very distinct partisan bent to them, and people are not aware of it. So you do need to get involved in town. You do need to bring that passion and make the change, because all politics is local.
Right. So what you're seeing then is, in your neighborhood, because it's already in mine and many places that I've lived, that partisan divide is in my view already grabbing most things. But in your neighborhood, it's just coming around.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, probably the best way to describe it here is it may not be political, but it is very definitely partisan. And what I mean by that, is politics sometimes has a negative connotation to it of, backroom dealings and underhanded tactics and, dare I say, sleaze, to some extent, right? So I think people here will find that distasteful. Having said that, though, they will almost always vote party line and I'm talking about local referendum. They will typically vote party line. The Republicans have had control of the Board of Selectmen, which is our governing body in town here, and that's fairly common in New England to have a Board of Selectmen. And they have generally had control of the Board of Selectmen for years, so we are a Republican majority town. But Republicans in Connecticut tend to be, as with most other New England states, Republicans here in Connecticut will probably be called Democrats, in more conservative states. Our Republicans tend to be socially liberal. They are fiscally conservative, but they're socially liberal, and so there's an almost sense of a trust, if you will, that they've run this town for years. We're okay. We're a moderately well-to-do town, and they've done fine. We'll let them keep doing it. And The problem with that, unfortunately, is that things happen with lack of transparency, and you don't see it unless you're paying attention.
Right. So is it your view that as Washington D.C. gets further and further to the extreme, it's trickling down to your neighborhood?
To some extent. I'm pleased to say that many of my Republican colleagues and friends in town were not Trump supporters. But having said that, some of the tactics are similar, where as I said, it is partisan, and the lack of transparency to me leaves a very bad taste in my mouth, because there's an intent to deceive. And so some of those tactics that you see in D.C., you will see in small town politics.
Interesting. So now I understand you're kind of being new to this. You're kind of mixing things up a little bit, which I think is a good thing. You get new blood, you get fresh blood, fresh ideas, kind of stirring the pot a bit. Tell me about it.
Well, interestingly enough, exactly, and I've received both positive and negative criticism about the approach that I bring. I'm pretty direct. I mean, you've seen me on Twitter, and you've seen some of the ways I'll call people out on the national stage. I bring that here, and it catches people off guard. And I'm okay with that, right? Everyone is not going to be my friend, nor is that my intent. My intent is to shake things up for the better. And if, some of the criticism I got from my own party was, hey, that's not how we do things here. And my response was, this town has been a Republican town for as long as I can remember, and you guys have been nice for as long as I remember. How's that worked out for you? So, let's mix things up a little bit. Let's show people let's show Republicans in town that, not that we're mean or nasty, but you can't take us for granted. We deserve a seat at the table, and we're going to push back. If you push, we're going to push back, and we're going to make you listen to us. And in fact, this school proposal, which is one of the things that has been going on for the last several weeks, the fact that you and I are pretty active on social media, I created a petition, and I floated it out on social media. Within 48 hours, I had 200 signatures. And, half of them were from town, right? Voters that will vote for the selectmen in town. The other half were from all over the country. And people were shocked, absolutely shocked, that anybody outside this little town cared about what's going on in this town. And so no one's ever done that before. And I think it sent a very clear signal to the power structure in town that there is a new way. We are looking forward to bringing a new way, to a new fight to local politics.
Good stuff. I mean, I'm hoping people are listening so that in their neck of the woods, they get involved, they take over, and they move us in the right direction. Matt, I wish you the best. I think great stuff. Congratulations on the big win. I look forward to you moving on and up and all of that.
Thank you very much, Rick, and talk to you soon.
Always great talking with you, our good friend Matt Parthasarathi. Again, you want to check out his stuff, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Check out some of the writings and get some of his thoughts. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the top.
As long as we can live in harmony. Why can't we be friends?
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1975. That was the day the AFL-CIO held a Jobs Now rally in Washington, D.C. A painful recession had pushed unemployment in the U.S. to 9%. Many workers across the nation thought the Ford administration was not doing enough to address the needs of working families. 60,000 people, many of them union members carrying banners representing their unions, gathered in RFK Stadium. There they heard speeches, including one from Senator Hubert H. Humphrey, who had served as vice president under Lyndon B. Johnson. His speech described the devastating impact of unemployment. Senator Humphrey said, "Our nation must recommit itself to the goal and the promise of full employment, a job for every American who is willing and able to work. Perhaps we would get bolder action and more compassion from this administration if some of its top advisors had a little taste of unemployment themselves. Perhaps they would know what unemployment is. It's drawing your last unemployment check with no job in sight. It's sitting in the dark to save on the light bill. It's making shoes last another month and driving on bald tires. It's eating a little less so the kids can eat a little more. It's facing eviction because you can't pay the rent or meet the mortgage. It's borrowing from your brother-in-law or letting your insurance lapse. It's facing yourself in the mirror and asking why and how much longer. It's wondering how a nation this rich, this enterprising, this great can let more than 8 million Americans who want to work and need to work go without work." Some protesters rushed the stage at the rally, causing it to end early. But his questions still remain. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
So I understand today the latest executive order photo op. It's being reported that Trump today is going to order a review of all national monuments that have been created over the last 20 years. Evidently, what we have done over the last 20 years, we've protected land. We've protected, things of great beauty. And I keep going back to, if you remember, I think it was last year or the year before, President Obama, or it was actually over a 2-year period, where they have a water sanctuary, out in the Pacific between Hawaii and California, where they've blocked off a whole bunch of acres of the water, so that you can't drill there. Said, look, we're going to maintain this water sanctuary, and hopefully life will thrive and all of that. And we're not going to allow dumping. We're not going to allow bad things to happen there. We've quarantined off a bit. And we've done this with a bunch of places across the country. I guess, President Clinton did it back in 96 with the Bears Ears Monument. I guess it was Grand Staircase was in Utah was Clinton, and it was Bears Ears with Obama. where you just said, you know what, we want to maintain this Navajo land. We want to make sure that, and some other tribes' land, we want to make sure that, we preserve the scenic and historic landscapes. We want to make sure it's there for future generations. We don't want to strip mine and rape and pillage. Just don't want to do that. And we've done that over the years and said, look, we want to make sure that we conserve, which again, I go back to, Teddy Roosevelt. The idea of conservatism is to conserve something. Evidently not going to be so much. Trump is going to review and, I would assume try and undo all of these things so that drill baby drill can come back. Now you've got the guy who's the head of the department that oversees this, the guy who rode his horse. Remember him? He rode his horse to work on his first day. Yeah, the Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Evidently, he told reporters yesterday that the executive order would require him to look into 30 national monuments and recommend which ones should be either lifted, no more monument status for you, or resize, which means, maybe just a sign so that we can drill all around the sign. Again, this is what we get. It's what we get. Nothing good there whatsoever. Now there are some who are saying, well, presidents have overused the Antiquities Act, which has allowed presidents to create monuments. Because look, at some point, being a president, you should be able to. Hey, this will be a monument. Not anymore. It'd be interesting to see what Donald Trump would choose as a monument. Just kind of a thought. Would it be one of his hotels? Hey, it is what it is. Good news today. Senator Bernie Sanders, along with Keith Ellison, of which I just saw both of them on Monday and Tuesday. Evidently today they are unveiling their $15 an hour federal minimum wage bill. It has gotten the support of Patty Murray, the Democratic senator from Washington State. Evidently in the House, Ellison and Bobby Scott, they're going to have the companion bill. Sanders is going to be along with Murray in the Senate. Now, what's interesting is you had a couple of Democrats like Bobby Scott of Virginia, who they were in favor of a $12 minimum wage hike last year, now on the $15 an hour bandwagon here. And look, at the end of this, it comes down to some simple, basic negotiating skills, and this is where Democrats always fall down. And you negotiate, you start, and the Republicans do this masterfully. You start off asking for, something big, and then you work your way back to what you'll settle for. You don't start off by going, well, we would like $10.10 an hour, please. That's a good number. We should do that. And then Republicans come up like they did here in Pennsylvania, say, no, $8.75. And then you end up negotiating yourself down. Now, granted, nothing in Pennsylvania has happened, and nor will it, because the Republicans control the House and the Senate here. But it's that basic negotiating. It's basic. Why would you start off where you will accept instead of what you really want? And this is where I think this bill is a good start. Now, will this pass in the Republican-controlled House and Senate? No, it's not going to pass. Because the Republicans want to repeal the minimum wage, as Donald Trump said. He's a guy who can't raise it, sorry. Wages are too high, taxes are too high, just can't do it. And at some point, do the working people of this country say enough is enough? I just came back from a convention of people who are the minimum wage workforce of this country. These are people who work really very hard. They're working harder and harder, making less and less, and ends aren't meeting. And they're active and engaged. It's going to be interesting to see what the next couple of years holds because, look, while right now 98% of Trump supporters say he's our guy, we're sticking with him. As the bellies grumble and the health care gets taken away and opportunity isn't coming back, at some point you think they have to wise up. Because I don't see anything coming out of this administration right now that moves us in a positive direction whatsoever. And that's what's scary to me. Nothing. Even the trade stuff that I had a little bit of hope for, a little bit that, he's got a cogent plan. He's got an idea of what direction we should go. He's got, a couple of reasonably smart people who might move us in a better trade direction. this latest thing, wow, we'll throw that all away for China to do something with North Korea, just blows the mind. Because there's nothing this guy stands for. Nothing. Except for himself. And, well, his businesses. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about those businesses as Ivanka has traveled to Germany. I didn't realize she was our top diplomat. We'll find out how that went and get some thoughts about that when we come back. Quick break. Right back with Andrea Chalupa. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
What do we want? Science! When do we want it? Now!
The March for Science was a global success on 7 continents.
We've had close to 5,000 scientists contact us to say they wanted to run for office.
What's next? Recruiting scientists to run for elected office. The planet hits a new milestone in rising CO2, plus, for Britain, its own milestone. The first full day without coal since the 1880s.
All of those encouraging stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Good evening. On this Saturday night, hundreds of thousands of people on 6 continents and throughout the United States came out in support of science.
And by the Sunday morning news shows, they were all forgotten. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, tens of thousands of scientists and people supporting them came out all over the world over the weekend.
Yes, they did. In fact, it was more than just tens, but we'll have more on that in a moment. First, a quick follow-up to a story in our last Green News Report. After a swift public outcry, the U.S. Treasury Department has rejected oil giant ExxonMobil's request for an exemption from sanctions against Russia that bar the company from moving forward on its offshore drilling deal. Exxon's request had attracted a lot of attention in the U.S. because the $500 billion deal was originally negotiated by then Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson, who is now U.S. Secretary of State.
Yeah, a lot of people presumed that this was going to be it. They were going to lift those sanctions, at least as far as Exxon was concerned. But the administration continues to surprise us one way or another.
Indeed they do. Also surprising, by all accounts, the March for Science on Earth Day was a global success.
Climate change is my biggest concern.
Science seems under attack. Now facts seem under attack.
You can see that there's a lot of hope and I think a little bit of fear, but a lot of hope.
Hundreds of thousands of people marched in the nation's capital and in more than 600 cities around the world to show their support for science and scientific research. And this was on all 7 continents. Even scientists at research outposts at the North and South Poles sent their photos of their mini marches. The nonpartisan march was to rally the public to defend science and its role in informing public policy in the face of the Trump administration's rollbacks of pollution protections, its denial of climate science, and its massive proposed cuts to scientific research and federal science agencies like the EPA and the National Institutes of Health. It's also notable that the March for Science was the top story on the broadcast networks, leading the nightly news on Saturday on CBS, ABC, and NBC.
It's been 47 years since the first Earth Day. Today, it was observed around the world with a focus on science.
Tens of thousands of scientists and their supporters taking to the streets.
However, Media Matters for America notes that some networks still couldn't resist promoting false journalistic balance and provided a platform to climate science deniers in their reports. We're looking at you, CNN and CBS.
Well, at least they covered it. at least on Saturday night after the marches had happened. But by Sunday morning, as Media Matters also points out, all of these marches, hundreds of thousands of people, were completely ignored the next day on all of the Sunday news shows.
Yep. And now the scientific community and environmentalists are gearing up for the People's Climate March on Saturday, April 29th. The Washington Post reports that the march's organizers are working on what's next, building on the momentum to create a science advocacy network to help scientists communicate their findings to the public and to help the public engage in science and speak up for science in policy making. But one group is going further. 314 Action, named after the first three digits of pi, is a new organization working to recruit scientists to run for office. In an interview with PBS NewsHour, founder Shaughnessy Naughton, a chemist turned congressional candidate, said politics needs more problem solvers.
We really need some people with scientific backgrounds to step up and get involved. We've had close to 5,000 scientists contact us to say they wanted to run for office.
But as the people march, the planet just marched past another carbon dioxide milestone. Thanks to humans digging up and burning fossil fuels, the concentrations of heat-trapping CO2 in the atmosphere have topped 410 parts per million over the weekend for the first time in the history of our species.
That's not good.
Nope. The planet's surface has already warmed nearly a full degree Celsius since the first Earth Day in April 1970. But finally, some good news. On Friday, the day before Earth Day, Britain saw its first full day without burning coal for electricity for the first time since the Industrial Revolution began in the late 1880s. Greenpeace UK called it, quote, a watershed in the energy transition.
No coal for the entire nation of Britain. Kind of amazing, wondering when the U.S. is going to even come close to anything like that feat.
No coal, please. We're British.
For much more on all of the stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Say you want a revolution, well, you know, we all want to change the world.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something in your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So the big news yesterday, Ivanka Trump booed in Germany. And I'm like, exactly why is she in Germany? And I guess, our new diplomat, if you remember last week, we talked that the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, put out that from now on, Ivanka and Jared Kushner were to be referred to as Secretary Trump and Secretary Kushner, which again, I don't know when the confirmation process happened. Not quite sure about that. But here to talk a little bit about what happened in Germany and why and all and how, our good friend Andrea Chalupa. Andrea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much, Rick. Always happy to be here.
So explain to me, why is Ivanka in Germany?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, all Americans would like that answer, considering that we did not elect her. During the election, she made it very clear that she would not be politically involved. She would, just remain in the role that she's stuck with for life as the daughter of Donald Trump, and that would be it. I think for her to do a bait and switch now and have and hold now without deserving it, one of the most powerful positions any human being could possibly have in the world, and that is being the assistant to the President of the United States of America and having your own office and your own staff in the Oval Office. I think that is, is tremendously disturbing, and many Americans do, and I think our allies do. And that was put on display for the entire world to see at this conference in Germany.
Well, I got to be honest with you. There are those who say, well, the president gets to choose his staff and his advisors and all of that. And, I remember during the campaign, Donald Trump said he was going to pick the best and the brightest. Is Ivanka the best and the brightest this country has on foreign policy, really?
I mean, Ivanka has exhibited that she's certainly not the best and certainly not the brightest. I mean, just take, for example, what she said in Germany, which was completely callous. She was sitting up there trying to defend her father and saying, when it came to women's issues. Now, keep in mind, this is Donald Trump. There's around 17 women who have accused Trump of sexual assault. This is somebody who defended Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly, who was, such a creep that he was even too creepy for Fox News, and he got pushed out because of all the, sexual harassment charges there. So this is Donald Trump. So he's dangerous for women. It's not even he's neutral. He's absolutely dangerous for women. So Ivanka is sitting there next to Merkel, next to Chrystia Freeland, and she's defending a sexual predator, a repeat sexual predator, by saying, based on her experiences being this man's daughter, that he's a great guy, that he's fine. She's never experienced anything, any mistreatment from her dad. So she says, that her response is the definition of nepotism. He's been great to me as his daughter. Well, that's because you're his daughter.
Right. He's supposed to be your dimwit.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, the fact that she's, her answer lacked total self-awareness. It lacks total empathy towards Donald Trump's many victims. It just shows a level of callousness that you're used to seeing from Assad's wife, Asma al-Assad, or Elena Ceausescu, the first, the wife of the dictator of Romania, when they were overthrown and put on this hastily organized trial by the rebellion. She was defiant until the very end. These people had no, Asma and Elena, they had no awareness of how many lives they've ruined and how many people they hurt. And Ivanka is showing early signs of that, and that's extremely troubling for the future.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
It's very, yeah.
Yeah, but you look at this and you go, if you want someone to be your spokesman, wouldn't your daughter be the best person to defend you? I mean, there are those who say, look, she's just sticking up for her father. What's wrong with that?
Well, the thing is, so what's wrong with that is that it's nepotistic. It's there's women that could be suffering under Trump now in the White House, and we're not even aware of it, and they're forced to not stay in that position because they want to be there to help serve the country,
right.
And there's no course for them. So what do? So we have to understand that Trump has shown a pattern of abuse, and it would be completely naive to think that this pattern would just turn off and stop on its own.
Yeah, good point. But let me ask you this, Andrea, because there are the others who say that she's the only one who can really get to him, and maybe from a woman's standpoint, her being in this position is good because maybe she can soften some of his however you want to characterize his positions. Maybe she's able to soften some of that, and that then would be good for women.
She hasn't shown that yet. Words are cheap, and Ivanka likes to speak in buzzwords. That sounds straight out of Mike Judge's Office Space. Her words are completely empty and very buzzy. And, so if Ivanka really wants to prove herself, she would reverse her father's policies on, gender equality, and help, fight for Medicaid, Medicare for all, reverse her father's damaging policies on the environment. She really has to show us with her actions, and she's not doing that. She thinks she can get by reading essentially well-crafted press releases and all these interviews.
Right, but let me ask you this.
Sounds just so polished and fake.
Right, but here's the thing. My view of it is she's a businesswoman. She's looking to make deals. You look at what went on in China. The same day she's there, she gets access to something else. I was fully expecting a press release to come out that the latest Ivanka bags or whatever else she sells is going to be in the German market.
The Oval Office collection.
There you go. Because after all, it's my view that this whole group, it's all about the cash. It's about the deal. It's about, opening that next business venture or the next gold-plated hotel.
It's about kleptocracy, exactly. And there's the mafia sort of spirit to the whole thing. It's like, if you're somebody that loves Godfather 1 and 2, as I do, you see this parallel with Ivanka being Michael Corleone. Maybe she doesn't condone all of what her father does, but now she's getting sucked into it because she's that animal too. And what's really frightening about this is that you see signs of that right now. So right after the election, Vanity Fair did this big story on Ivanka, and there was a paragraph that absolutely, jumped out at me and was completely chilling. And that paragraph was describing how when the Access Hollywood tape came out, where you have her father on tape describing how he enjoys sexually assaulting women and throwing himself on them. Ivanka's response was, yeah, sure, apologize, do your due diligence on that, make sure that, but then hit back harder. So there wasn't, to me, that's just crazy. That just shows a person's value system. It shows a lack of empathy, and it shows a lack of humanity. And so what Americans have to brace themselves for is that, Ivanka and Jared, they're extremely ambitious. They have their tentacles wrapped all over this administration. It's very clear that they're trying to build the network in Washington, D.C. and around the world to set up their own campaign for the White House. Because, after they leave the White House, after the father's term is over, where else do they go? There's nowhere to go but to stay there and to have a Jared administration and have an Ivanka administration. We could really be looking at a legacy of Trump. And that's a reality given how abysmal our voting suppression crisis is across the U.S. in some key red districts.
So there's a thought right there that I think should scare the vast majority of people in this country already. If you're talking about building another dynasty like the Bush dynasty or even the Clinton dynasty.
Right, absolutely. I think, Americans got rid of their king for a reason. And I think we have to really allow fresh new blood, fresh new ideas, and to really invigorate the progressive movement. We're in a time of crisis. At the same time, you have this wonderful revolutionary spirit with the Indivisible movement and other movements. And so I think, we need a lot. It's like an all hands on deck moment for America right now. And we need a lot of people to step up and consider themselves as, material to run for office. We really need people to be full-time citizens now.
No, I'm with you, but here's the thing. And I keep grappling with, I think back to my grandparents' generation who were very distrustful of the extremely wealthy and, the billionaire class, if you will. Not that they had many back then, but they were distrustful of that kind. When did we embrace that kind of egomaniacal hooray for me that when did we embrace the billionaire class as probably our only saviors?
Right, and that's a very good question. And just to your point, in France, you had the older generation in France did not vote for Le Pen. There's a very low showing for the older folks in France. Not just voting for opponents of Le Pen, and the thinking behind that was that this was a generation where fascism was not an abstraction. These people lived under occupation by fascists, and so they saw disturbing echoes in Le Pen's rhetoric. And so it goes to show that history is not just in the past. History is a mirror. History is there to protect us, and so we have to pay very close attention to our history and the pitfalls that we can very easily fall back into.
Right.
So in terms of how this billionaire class came to be, I just think there's been a lot of effort on the GOP side in building a political infrastructure from the bottom up. They've been very vigilant for decades, very good about that, and now we're seeing a lot of the seeds that they're sowing because of that. They're now reaping the benefits of that, and so it's time for the Democrats to really invade politics from the bottom up and to fight back and think in terms of decades, not years, because the resistance is really strong now. I'm sure we'll be strong next year, but we have to keep going.
Right.
We have to. No one can be asleep anymore. We've lost the luxury of being passive citizens.
Yeah, there are no more off years.
No more.
And again, I've been saying for years, there should be no such thing as an off-year election. Every election should matter. But you're so spot on right that the right wing in this country has built massive infrastructure. You go back to the early 70s and the Powell Memo and the Heritage Foundation and American Legislative Exchange Council, all of this infrastructure that they built. And I saw a tweet by Sean Hannity the other day that said there's liberal fascism, and I was stopped. I was actually struck at the ignorance of that. I'm going, liberal fascism? Really? How do you get there?
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Project much?
It works. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, look at what Erdogan's done to Turkey, what Putin's done to Russia. These guys didn't turn these countries into prisons overnight. it took time for them to become, in effect, dictators. And that could very easily happen here. And people don't understand how fragile democracy is and how you have to protect it.
No, I mean, and the reason I bring up the Hannity tweet is, whenever I've come around to the reality of whatever they say the left is doing or liberals are doing, it's exactly what they're doing.
Absolutely.
It's what's on their mind because it's what's in the front of their brain. And then, well, that's bad, and we're going to accuse them. We are moving towards that fascist state. And I look at this love affair that the right wing seems to have with Russia and Putin and the oligarchs, how they run things there and how they want to seem to bring it here. And it's one of those things that kind of scares me because, look, I grew up during the Cold War. I remember mutually assured destruction. I remembered, under the desk, the bombs could be coming. That kind of stuff, could come back.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, having this oligarch class, like look at the Mercers, like look at the Koch brothers, it's already there. And when you have this oligarch class and you embolden them, one of my big concerns is that, Chrystia Freeland, who was on that stage in Germany with Ivanka and Merkel, Chrystia Freeland, Foreign Minister of Canada, formerly the editor of the Financial Times, she wrote a brilliant book on plutocracy. So she went around interviewing some of the masters of the universe to understand their thinking and how they got to that position. And one of the shocking discoveries of her book is that once these giants reached a level of absolute influence in their fields and reached the level of a Robert Mercer, they didn't care how they got there. They wanted to pull up the ladder so no one else could go because they attributed all their success to themselves, as though they themselves are essentially gods. And they didn't care about helping any others along the way. And she saw that as, obviously that doesn't apply to all billionaires. There's some wonderful benevolent billionaires out there, of course. But, she saw that as a disturbing pattern in enough of the people that she interviewed for her book on plutocrats. And I think there's a wonderful appeal when some of our plutocrats in the U.S. see how the Russians get to live and how they basically, as long as they stay out of the Kremlin's way, they're free to build whatever wealth they need to build for themselves, or they'd like to build for themselves. And I think that's a very appealing concept for a lot of our plutocrats. And I think it's very fair to say they're trying to replicate that here, how that, by getting rid of reforms, by, attacking the press, calling the press, the enemy of the state, and trying to weaken our checks and balances to allow this place to become like the Wild West, where oligarchs can just have their way and cement their control.
Well, as I've been saying, Andrea, the politics is the new polo. The wealth class, it's their game now. And,
exactly.
while they have all the money, I still believe we've outprocreated them. While we still can vote, at some point, you've got to look, as our grandparents' generation or my grandparents' generation, you look at, some type of disdain for the Trumps of the world and the Mercers and the Kochs, because their interests are certainly not the same as our interests.
No, absolutely. And like I keep going back to this, it's very much in the spirit of the mafia. It's corruption. It's total disregard for the rule of law.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Andrea. I mean, the mafia, at least everybody ate. They spread things around. It may not have been great, but the buses ran on time. Things still were done. These folks, it's just about taking everything. There are no crumbs left behind.
Well, I mean, they might argue that they give where they prefer to give. And they, that's why they don't want to have to pay taxes, the environment, and schools, because they want to control where their money goes and how they spend it. So they would argue that they do have their pet projects to help run the so-called buses on time. But yeah, no, I just think it's like the mafia. It's a total disregard for the rule of law and changing the rules to benefit you. And that is what Jared and Ivanka are doing repeatedly in this White House, where you saw, Jared not listing that he was in contact with the Russian ambassador on his clearance form, just like something so sensitive as that being left off. Like that's something that's like he does need to lawyer up. Congressman Liu is right.
So let me ask you, since you brought that up, I mean, this week we saw Jason Chaffetz, the Republican from Utah, who I was expecting to have resigned by now, but saying that he doesn't see anything to indicate Michael Flynn actually followed the law. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yes, so that's nice to see Chaffetz, kind of coming around and doing his job. I think if he put, just like a quarter of the energy that he put into the Benghazi investigation that ran for over 2 years and had nearly a dozen separate investigations. If he put in nearly like a quarter of that energy into Russiagate, I'm convinced the Trumps and Bannon would be out of the Oval Office by now. So it's nice to see Chafetz sort of step up and at least perform as if he's doing his job. Michael Flynn is very much on the hook. There's no way he's getting immunity. That guy broke very serious laws out in the open. It just showed that he was, operating on another planet where it was just completely bizarre, the mistakes that he was making. It was just a total disregard of the rule of law.
And what it's kind of interesting to me is how quickly they've thrown him under the bus.
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point. But the thing is, there's a lot of these sort of characters from Stone to Manafort that are entangled in similar webs. I just think Flynn, General Misha, as he likes to call himself, according to some emails that were revealed, I just think that he is sort of the sloppiest of all of them. And honestly, there might be something mentally wrong with that person, and just to sort of be so cavalier and out in the open with his crimes.
That seems to be a theme. That seems to be a theme.
Yeah.
So mentally ill.
Yes, yeah, and I think he's definitely low hanging fruit. But he's not going to be the first. He's not going to be the last who's going to be caught up in this and in serious trouble. There's going to be more low hanging fruit be picked off.
So last question I've got for you, because you saw Chafetz, all the news around him last week, and some are saying an affair, some are saying Russian money from Trump. Any thoughts on this whole scenario, or is that going to blow over and maybe he doesn't resign?
Right. So that was a big sort of interesting development last week, where it was announced that he was going to resign, and you even had the Secretary of State of Utah preparing a special election, and so that announcement was in the press as well. So what we know for sure is this: in the intel report that Obama ordered right before he left office, by the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA, they mentioned very clearly in the report that the Russians had hacked Republicans. Including, individual Republican leaders.
Right.
So we know how vile the GOP is out in public. They're happy to destroy Obamacare, even though millions of lives are literally at stake. A lot of their voting, including cutting funding for embassies, which contributed in part to the Dodge parties. These guys don't care. They go against national interest all the time. They have votes that in effect, it's harmonized not only here but around the world. So that's what they're like in private over email. So when these emails are out, there's not a lot of little petty white that people are taking at each other, and of course, it's just down to how they handle primaries. And that's probably nothing in comparison to what Republican leaders are like in private over email, given what their values are like out in the open. I think absolutely. So I think it's horrible how they sort of undermine their democracy just as a matter of Republican Party platform. They really turn far and farther to far right. And I think we no longer give them the benefit of the doubt, and that's true, and I'm not the only one to say that. That's the consensus at this point. Look at how they're obstructing legitimately the investigation into Russiagate, which is a nonpartisan crisis, which is a matter of sovereignty. So, and then on top of that, you have links to Citizens United. It's much easier for dark money to funnel through our political system, and this can, of course, go to not only Republicans and Democrats. And it's very difficult to trace. If you wanted to look at how Manafort was able to funnel money in Washington, D.C., under the former president, the Kremlin president, Yanukovych, just about Ukraine, Paul Manafort, advising him that president set up an organization in Brussels with a beautiful democratic sounding name, something like the European Center for European Ukraine. Something really ridiculous. That was just funneling money to Washington.
Casey, we got to get you back to pick up right from that spot.
Absolutely. I love you. Thank you so much, Rick.
Appreciate it so much, Andrea. Children, if you want to check out some more stuff, we'll get a link at ricksmithshow.com. You can take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History. On this day in Labor History, the year was 1944. That was the day the Army National Guard seized the Chicago property of Montgomery Ward and removed its chairman to slavery. The Chicago-based company repeatedly refused to accept a National War Labor Board order to recognize the workers' union and abide by the board negotiated collective bargaining agreements. After refusing the Second World Order, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the Army National Guard to seize the company's Central Mail Order House, retail store, and other related properties in the city. Avery was physically carried out of his office. Wartime no-strike pledges were in effect to avoid strikes or any disruption in production. From a distance, it looked as if the president had triumphed for the cause of labor in forcefully implementing Wagner Act. Workers of the CLO United Mail Order Warehouse and Retail Employees Union had walked off the job over recognition issues on April 12th. Montgomery Ward officials argued again, as they had 2 years earlier, that they were not engaged in war production, held no government contracts, and that the dispute is not one which might impede the prosecution of the war by the board's own terms. But the government feared strike activity would only spread to other industries in Chicago and elsewhere. Local Teamsters and railway brotherhoods all supported the strike and refused to handle shipment to and from Ward facilities. The CIO union agreed to end the strike on the eve of a seizure. Others in the labor movement called FDR's move a hoax and a device to break strikes and get workers back on the job without any gains. Roosevelt issued a third seizure of Ward's facilities nationwide by the end of the year. Labor History 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and the Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistory2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History 2. Making the blood zero. The Rick Smith Show. Tax plan is going to be unveiled. I can't wait to see what the Donald has in store for us. And again, I think some key, some very key points are going to be more tax breaks for the wealthy, more cutting of popular deductions for we the people, more of a tax shift from us to them. Guaranteed, this is going to benefit Trump. This is going to benefit the family, the business. It is what it is, my friends. And at the end of it, we had better be organizing. We had better be standing up and ready to fight back because, look, they now control all of the levers of power. Think about that. Republicans have steamroller power. And even how bad the Affordable Care Act was, it wasn't even palatable to them because it wasn't bad enough. Think about that. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, you can download the podcast there at ricksmithshow.com. You want to send me an email, rick at ricksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. Back tomorrow, we're going to play a couple of clips from our time in Washington, D.C., a couple of interviews with the folks that we were there with. Also, our good friend Eddie Yankovich will be back as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.